I arrived in the village on the back of an old truck, the fog so thick around us that the road seemed to dissolve into it. I had never been here before. I only knew it was small, isolated, a place spoken of in half-remembered family stories. My aunt had written once, years ago, that she lived here to marrying a man from the forested valley. Her letter stopped without explanation. That silence is what brought me. The village was exactly as I imagined, crooked houses leaning into one another as if afraid to stand alone, smoke drifting from chimneys in lazy spirals, and everywhere, the smell of damp earth. The truck left me by the well in the center of the square. I stood there with my suitcase, listening to the faint sound of water dripping below the cobblestones. It felt ordinary at first. Children chased each other near the church, their laughter cutting through the fog. Women hung laundry on lines strung between sagging houses. An old man in a wool cap tipped his head to me without smiling. Life went on, simple and quiet, as if untouched by the world beyond the forest. And yet there was something off, something I couldn't name. Perhaps it was the silence between the sounds, the way the laughter of the children seemed to loud, to forced, and then vanished all at once, leaving behind a silence that pressed against my ears. Perhaps it was the way the villagers' eyes lingered on me, their gazes pale and unblinking, as though they weren't curious, but measuring. Or perhaps it was the fog itself, the way it clung to the houses like a shroud, never lifting, never thinning, even when the sun was high. I told myself it was only my imagination, that I was tired from the journey. I walked to the small inn on the edge of the square. The innkeeper, a stout woman with hair pinned tightly back, gave me a room without asking my name. She spoke little, only murmuring that dinner would be served after sundown. That night, I lay awake listening to the sounds of the village. There was no traffic, no hum of electricity, only the occasional bark of a dog and, once, a sharp cry that was cut off so quickly I wondered if I had dreamed it. The fog pressed against my window as if it wanted to get inside. The next morning, the strangeness began. I went to the square again, hoping to find someone who remembered my aunt, someone who could tell me why her letters had stopped. The well was surrounded by women filling buckets. One of them began to laugh, a soft, nervous giggle at first, but then louder, shriller, until she doubled over, her water spilling onto the cobblestones. The others did not help her. They did not even look at her. They stood still, their eyes fixed on the fog, while her laughter cracked and broke into sobs. I stepped forward, uncertain, but before I could reach her she fell silent. She rose with her bucket, her face blank as if nothing had happened, and walked away without looking at anyone. No one spoke of it. Later that day, in the inn, I heard a man shouting outside. His voice was guttural, strained, speaking words I didn't understand. They sounded like no language I knew, harsh and broken, repeating the same syllables again and again. I pressed myself against the window, trying to see him through the fog. I saw only his shadow on the cobblestones, twisting, jerking, until suddenly it was gone. When I asked the innkeeper about it, she said nothing. She only smiled, too wide, too stiff, and set a bowl of stew before me, as though silence were the only answer I would ever receive. That night, the fog was thicker. I couldn't see the square from my window anymore, only the shifting grey mass that swirled against the glass. Somewhere beyond it, a child cried, the sound high and thin, carrying for what felt like hours. No one comforted them. No one even tried. Lying in bed, I realized what unsettled me most. It wasn't the fog, or the silence, or even the strange behavior of the villagers. It was the sense that the village itself was alive, watching, waiting, breathing with us. And I wondered, as sleep finally dragged me under, if I had been foolish to come. The second morning in the village was quieter, too quiet. When I opened the shutters, the fog poured into my room, smoke from a fire, curling against the walls until I pushed it back with the window. Outside, the square was almost empty, only a few shapes moving slowly as if through water. I went downstairs for breakfast. The innkeeper was already awake, though she hadn't slept much. I could see it in her eyes, rimmed with red, her smile stretched thin. She placed bread and cheese on the table, her hands trembling slightly as she set down the plate. "Is everything all right?" I asked. She blinked at me. "Everything is as it always is," and then she left the room. I sat there, chewing the stale bread, listening to the silence. It wasn't empty silence. It was weighted, like someone holding their breath just out of sight. When I left the inn, I saw the first disappearance. It was near the church, where the fog was thickest. A boy, no older than 12, stood alone, his face pale. He was whispering something, too low for me to hear. His lips moved quickly, frantically, as if in prayer. Then he stopped. His eyes rolled back, his arms hung limp, and he simply walked into the fog. I ran after him, but the fog swallowed him whole. My hands clawed at the grey, but there was no boy, no footsteps, not even an echo, just silence, and the faint smell of damp stone. When I stumbled back into the square, gasping, the villagers were watching me. Their eyes followed me like birds tracking prey. None of them spoke, none of them asked where I had gone. They only stared until I felt I might collapse beneath their gaze. I retreated to the well, my chest heaving. A group of women stood there, whispering among themselves. At first I thought it was gossip, but as I drew closer, I realized their words made no sense. They repeated the same syllables again and again, low and rhythmic, like a chant. Their eyes didn't blink. Their buckets sat forgotten at their feet. One of them turned to me suddenly. Her mouth was still moving, but the sound had stopped. She grinned, teeth bared, and the chant seemed to hang in the air without her. I fled before I could see more. The rest of the day passed in fragments. A man screaming at the sky until his voice cracked. An old woman standing perfectly still in the middle of the road, her arms outstretched, as if waiting for something to descend. Children circling the church, holding hands and singing a song I didn't recognize. The melody crooked, the words warped. By sundown, my nerves were raw. I returned to the inn, desperate for the safety of my room, but the innkeeper was waiting at the door. She smiled too widely, her lips trembling. "You should stay inside at night," she said. "Why?" I asked. Her smile faltered. She glanced at the fog pressing against the window. Then she whispered, "Because the village is awake then." And she left me without another word. That night, I couldn't sleep. The fog was heavier, thicker than before, wrapping the houses like a blanket. I lay in bed listening. The silence broke again and again. The sound of footsteps pacing outside my door, the scrape of nails against wood, the low mutter of voices speaking in that same strange tongue. Once, I heard laughter, high, shrill, bubbling like water boiling over. It started outside, and then moved down the hall, passing my door, fading into the distance. I pressed my hands against my ears, but it didn't stop. It was inside me now, whispering against the walls of my skull. By morning, the village was quiet again, as if nothing had happened. But I knew something had cracked, and there was no going back. I had come searching for answers about my aunt. Instead, I had found a place that devoured answers, swallowed them whole, leaving only questions that grew darker each day. And I could feel it. The village was watching me closer now, waiting, deciding whether I belonged to it too. By the third day, the village had changed. Or maybe it hadn't. Maybe only I had changed, seeing through the thin skin of normalcy to what hid beneath. Either way, the fog was thicker, the silence heavier, and the villagers stranger. I walked to the square early, hoping to find it empty, but it was already full. Not bustling, standing. Villagers clustered in small groups, speaking in low tones. The sounds were not conversations. They were recitations, chants without melody. I stopped in the shadow of the church and listened. The words were unfamiliar, yet their rhythm pulled at me. A steady rise and fall, like breathing, like tides. Each group spoke the same sequence, but slightly out of sync, creating a murmuring echo that filled the square like wind through dead leaves. At first it was gibberish. Then I began to hear shapes in it. Not words exactly, but patterns. A syllable rising like a question, another falling like a sigh. Then again, again, again. My mind began to fill in meaning where none should have been. I felt the sound against my skin, like cold fingers pressing into my arms. When a woman turned and looked at me, I heard the syllables in her eyes. I fled back to the inn. The innkeeper was waiting. She was stirring a pot of stew, though it was barely mid-morning, the ladle scraping the bottom in slow, deliberate circles. Her lips moved silently. "You're speaking it too," I said without meaning to. She looked up. Her eyes were wide and unblinking. "It's only the way the fog speaks," she murmured. "It's always been here." She handed me a bowl of broth I hadn't asked for. The smell was earthy, metallic. I set it down without tasting it. When I left again, the fog had crept closer. It lapped at my boots like water. Every corner of the village seemed narrower now, the houses leaning in, their windows glinting like eyes. I heard the chants everywhere, behind doors, in alleys, even in the rustle of trees at the edge of the square. Once, near the churchyard, I saw a man kneeling in the mud. His hands were pressed to the stones, his forehead resting on his thumbs. He whispered into the earth. The fog swirled around him, as though listening. He looked up as I passed. His mouth was full of dirt. I stumbled away, my heart hammering. Late evening, as the sun dipped behind the forest, the chanting grew louder. I sat in my room at the inn, trying to block it out, but the syllables had already taken root in me. They crawled behind my eyes, lined up like beads on a string. I tried writing in my notebook, but my hand betrayed me. Instead of words, I found myself sketching spirals, circles, lines that intersected at impossible angles, symbols I had never seen but knew intimately. When I closed my eyes, I could hear my aunt's voice. Not a memory, not exactly, more like an echo from a place I couldn't name. She was speaking the same syllables. Her tone was pleading, warning. I woke from a doze to find my window open, the fog spilling in. My notebook lay on the bed, covered in symbols I didn't remember drawing. They pulsed faintly in the dim light, as if the ink was still alive. And over it all, the villagers' voices rose in unison, no longer fragmented groups. One voice, one chant, carried through the fog like a tide rising to swallow everything. For the first time, I understood a piece of it. Not a word, not exactly, but a meaning. Welcome. The fog pressed against my skin, cold and damp, but under it was something warm, like breath. I closed the window and sat in the dark, my heart hammering. I had come looking for my aunt. Now I was afraid I was becoming her. By the fourth day, the absences could no longer be ignored. It began in small ways. A chair left empty at the inn's common table, a door swinging open in the wind where I had seen a family enter the day before. The absence of footsteps where footsteps should have been. The absence of voices that had once filled the square. I asked the innkeeper where the missing had gone. She smiled, her lips trembling. "They have gone into the mist," she said softly, as if reciting a prayer. "When will they return?" I asked. Her smile widened, too wide. "The mist keeps what it takes." That day, the square was quieter still. The villagers still gathered, still whispered their chants, but the groups were thinner. One counted and recounted. Certain whole households had vanished overnight. When I tried to approach one of the groups to ask, they turned their faces toward me in eerie unison. Their mouths moved together, forming the syllables I had begun to understand. Not welcome this time. Something heavier, colder. Belong. A child's shoe lay abandoned near the well. I picked it up, but no one claimed it. No one even looked. I thought of the boy I had seen walk into the fog, of the woman laughing until she collapsed, of the dirt in the man's mouth. One by one, they had slipped away, unnoticed, unacknowledged, and the village carried on, as if people had never existed at all. The air itself seemed to grow thicker. The fog pressed closer, curling around corners, seeping into doorframes. It seemed to eat sound. Even my own footsteps were muffled, lost in the grey. That night, I dreamed of my aunt again. She stood at the edge of the forest, her face hidden in shadow. She beckoned to me, whispering words I almost understood. But when I stepped forward, she dissolved into mist. I woke to scratching at my door. At first I thought it was an animal, but then I heard the rhythm of it, deliberate, human. 3 strokes, pause. 3 strokes, pause. I held my breath, clutching the blanket to my chest. The scratching went on, and on, long after my pulse had grown frantic. When it stopped, I dared to creep to the door. There was nothing outside, only a smear of mud on the wood, shaped like the same spirals I had drawn in my notebook. The next morning, more houses stood empty. Their windows gaped like blind eyes. No one spoke of it. The villagers went on with their routines, filling buckets, sweeping stoops, their faces blank, but their numbers were dwindling. I wandered toward the edge of the village, past the crooked fence that separated the square from the woods. The forest loomed, black trunks rising into endless fog. I heard voices there, faint, distant, yet unmistakably human. They were calling, not in pain, but in invitation, their syllables merging with the language of the fog. I felt myself take a step toward them. My body moved before I could think. My foot sank into the mud, my breath caught in my chest. The pull was gentle, but undeniable, as if the earth itself leaned toward the forest. Only the tolling of the church bell saved me. It rang out suddenly, shattering the fog's hold. My body jerked back, my mind clearing. I staggered to the square, my heart thundering. The bell had stopped by the time I arrived, but the villagers stood in neat rows before the church, their faces lifted toward the spire. Their lips moved in silence, chanting words I could not hear, but felt inside me. The fog coiled thicker around the church, hiding its edges until it seemed to dissolve into the grey. And I realized the vanishing wasn't random, it was ritual. The fog was not taking them at will. The village was giving them up. The church bell rang again the next morning, not a full peal, only a single toll, long, low, and heavy, like the strike of a heart too weak to beat more than once. It reverberated through the fog, drawing me toward the square. The villagers were already gathered. They stood in rows before the church, motionless, their heads bowed. No one spoke, no one moved. The fog curled around them, weaving in and out of their still figures, like smoke through a field of statues. I watched from the edge of the square, afraid to get closer. The silence was unbearable. My ears strained for sound, for breath, for the creak of a floorboard or a cough. Nothing, only the weight of the fog pressing down. And then, as one, they lifted their heads. Their lips moved, but no sound emerged. Still, I heard it. In my skull, in my ribs, in the marrow of my bones, the chant, louder than ever, spilling into me without passing through the air. The syllables bent and twisted, wrapping around my thoughts until I couldn't tell which ones were mine. I turned to flee, but my body betrayed me. My feet carried me forward, step by step, toward the church doors. The crowd parted without looking at me, their faces pale, their eyes blank. They moved aside not as if I were intruding, but as if I had always belonged. The church doors yawned open, the wood slick with damp, the iron hinges rusted. I crossed the threshold, my breath shallow. Inside, the air was colder, the pews were warped, their wood swollen from years of damp. Candles guttered in iron sconces, their flames bending toward the fog that seeped even here. The altar stood at the far end, but it was not like any altar I had ever seen. The stone slab was carved with symbols, spirals, circles, jagged lines that twisted into one another. My fingers twitched. I had drawn these before, unknowingly, in my notebook. Seeing them here filled me with a sick recognition, as though the church itself had stolen them from my dreams. Behind the altar, the wall was covered in carvings, not saints, not crosses. Faces, hundreds of faces, etched into the stone, their mouths open in eternal screams. Some were worn smooth by time, their features barely visible. Others were sharp and recent, their eyes hollow, their lips twisted. I stepped closer, my pulse pounding. Their mouths were not screaming, they were speaking. The shapes of the syllables were there, frozen in stone. I backed away, my heel striking something on the floor. I looked down. A child's doll. Its face cracked, its body damp. Its painted eyes stared up at me, glassy and wide. And then I heard footsteps. The villagers were entering, silent, filling the pews one by one. Their eyes were fixed on the altar, their mouths already moving. The chant rose again, swelling, vibrating against the stone until I thought the walls would crack. I crouched low, pressing myself into the shadows behind a pillar. My heart thundered in my chest, but none of them looked at me. The innkeeper was among them. Her face was calm, serene, her lips moving steadily with the rest. She carried something in her hands, a bundle wrapped in cloth. She set it on the altar. The chanting grew louder, sharper. The fog thickened inside the church, curling around the pews, wrapping the altar like a shroud. The bundle moved. My stomach lurched. It wasn't cloth at all. It was flesh, a small body, too still, too silent. I bit my fist to keep from crying out. The villagers raised their hands in unison. Their voices joined in a single, piercing note. The fog surged upward, swallowing the altar, the bundle, the symbols carved into the walls. For a moment, the church was nothing but grey. And then, silence. When the fog thinned, the bundle was gone. The altar was bare. The villagers lowered their hands and filed out of the church, their expressions blank. The innkeeper lingered a moment, her eyes scanning the shadows. For a heartbeat, I thought she saw me, but she only whispered, "The mist keeps what it takes." Then she left. I stood alone in the hollow church, staring at the empty altar, the screaming faces on the wall, and the fog curling tighter around me. And I knew the disappearances were no accident. They were offerings. I thought the forest might offer escape. After the ritual in the church, after the bundle vanished in fog before my eyes, I could not stay within the village square. The walls pressed into tightly. The villagers' blank stares clawed at me like unseen hands. I packed nothing, carried nothing. I only followed the faint trail toward the trees, desperate for air that wasn't soaked with incense and whispers. The forest rose before me in a black wall, its trunks disappearing into the fog that seemed denser here than anywhere else. The air smelled of wet bark and rot. A hush lay over the woods, the kind of silence that comes before a scream. I hesitated at the fence line, hand pressed to the crooked wood, but then I heard it, voices. Not the chants from the square, not the murmurs of the villagers. These voices were distant, drifting through the trees. They carried on the mist like threads of breath. Some were high and thin, like children crying. Others were low, guttural, almost animal. They overlapped, forming a chorus that tugged at my bones. I stepped forward. The fog swallowed me. The path was uneven, roots clawing up from the earth like ribs. My shoes slipped in mud, my dress caught on thorns. Still, the voices drew me on. They seemed both close and impossibly far, always just ahead, leading me deeper. The farther I went, the less the forest resembled anything natural. The trees bent at wrong angles, their branches curling inward like fingers. Strange markings scarred the bark, spirals, circles, the same shapes carved into the church wall. Some were fresh, the cuts raw and bleeding sap. Others seemed older, etched so deep they had become part of the tree's very flesh. I ran my fingers over one of the spirals. The bark was warm, too warm. The voices swelled suddenly, sharp and urgent, as if reacting to my touch. My heart raced. I stumbled back, nearly falling into the mud. The spiral seemed to pulse beneath my hand even as I pulled away. I forced myself onward. The fog grew thicker until the world shrank to a few feet of shifting grey. Every sound was muffled, yet the voices cut through, clear and sharp. Sometimes they called my name. Sometimes they laughed. Once, they wept in unison, a sound so raw it brought tears to my eyes. I lost track of time. Minutes, hours. I don't know. The forest folded in on itself, each tree like the last, each bend of the path leading only deeper. And then I found the clearing. The ground there was blackened, as if scorched by fire. No grass grew, only charred soil that crumbled beneath my feet. At the center stood a stone, not a natural boulder, but a slab, upright, taller than me. Its surface was carved with the same spirals, the same circles, only here they were far more elaborate. Whole constellations of symbols spread across the stone, etched with obsessive precision. I approached, trembling. The voices fell silent. The silence was worse than the whispers. It was heavy, suffocating, pressing into my ears until I thought they would burst. I touched the stone with a shaking hand, desperate to break it. The carvings burned. Not fire, not heat. Something colder. Something that sank into my flesh and bone. Images burst behind my eyes. Faces I had never seen, mouths open in endless screams. A child's hand reaching into fog. A tower crumbling into grey. My own face, twisted, eyes hollow. I wrenched my hand away, gasping. The fog writhed around me, coiling like a living thing. The silence broke. The voices roared, so loud I dropped to my knees. They spoke in 1,000 tongues, yet I understood every word. The mist keeps what it takes. The same words the innkeeper had whispered. I staggered back, desperate to flee, but the forest had shifted. The clearing had no path out. The trees closed in, their branches knitting together into a wall of black. The fog surged higher, choking me, filling my mouth, my lungs. I screamed, but no sound came, only the echo of their chant. When I came to, I was lying at the edge of the village again. The crooked fence loomed above me, the square silent beyond. My clothes were soaked, my shoes caked with black mud. My hands still burned where I had touched the stone. The village looked the same, but I knew it wasn't. The forest had followed me back. When I woke the next morning, the village had changed. It wasn't something I could point to. The houses stood where they had always stood. The well still glistened with damp at the center of the square. The church loomed with its crooked spire. And yet, everything felt shifted, tilted, like the entire place had been turned slightly askew while I slept. The fog was heavier, thick enough to taste. My throat burned with it, as though I had inhaled smoke from a dying fire. It clung to my skin, sank into my clothes, weighted every movement. The villagers were busy. For the first time since I had arrived, they moved with urgency, carrying bundles from house to house, lighting torches though the sun was still hidden behind the grey. They tied ropes across the square, hung strange charms from door frames. Small wooden figures, bound in twine, dangled from eaves and fences. Each one had a spiral carved into its chest. Children moved among the adults, silent, their eyes wide. Some carried bowls filled with dark liquid that steamed in the cold. Others dragged sticks behind them, tracing circles into the mud. No one spoke, not to me, not to each other. And yet, I felt the murmur of voices everywhere, beneath the skin of the fog, inside the walls, beneath the ground itself. By the well, the innkeeper stood with her hands folded. She no longer smiled. Her face was grave, her eyes hollow. When I passed her, she whispered a single word, so soft I almost thought I imagined it. Tonight. I didn't ask what she meant. Some part of me already knew. The day stretched long and distorted, time bending under the weight of the mist. I tried to write, to capture what I saw, but my hand shook too badly. The words blurred on the page, dissolving into shapes that looked more like the spirals carved into the church walls than letters of my language. At dusk, the bells began. Not one, not two, but many. Every house, every hand seemed to hold a bell of some kind. Their tolling filled the air, clashing in discordant waves. The sound drilled into my skull, vibrating in my teeth. The villagers gathered in the square. Each carried a torch, the flames bending toward the fog as if drawn to it. The ropes they had tied formed a circle around the well, and within that circle, the children stood. The sight made my stomach twist. Their faces were blank, their hands clasped together. They swayed gently, side to side, as if rocked by a rhythm I could not hear. The adults circled them, raising their torches high. The chanting began, low at first, then building, spilling into the same syllables that haunted my dreams. Belong, belong, belong. The fog thickened, drawn into the square like water into a drain. It coiled around the children, wrapping them in its pale hands. One by one, they tilted their heads back, their mouths opening. From their throats came a sound, not human, not childlike. A long, hollow wail that split the night. The innkeeper stepped forward, her torch raised. She turned toward the church, toward the spire that vanished into grey, and cried out words I did not understand. The villagers answered in unison, their voices merging with the children's screams. The ground trembled, the rope strained as though pulled from below. The charms rattled, their spirals glowing faintly in the firelight. I pressed myself against the wall of a house, heart hammering. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee into the forest, into the night, anywhere but here. And yet, my legs refused to move. I was bound, not by ropes, but by the weight of the fog, by the pull of something far older than the village. The innkeeper dropped her torch into the well. The flames vanished instantly, swallowed whole. For a moment, silence. Utter, suffocating silence. Then the fog erupted. It burst from the well in a column, towering, twisting, a living thing. It spilled outward, engulfing the villagers, the torches, the ropes. The children's screams rose higher, sharper, until they no longer sounded like voices, but like the tearing of fabric, the splitting of earth. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it was inside me, vibrating in my bones. My vision blurred, the square spinning, tilting. The fog pressed into me, into every pore, every thought, filling me with its chant. And through it all, I saw faces, not the villagers, not the children. Other faces, countless, ancient, eyes hollow, mouths open in eternal cries. They swirled within the fog, pressing against its surface, begging, warning, commanding. When the column collapsed, the torches had all gone out. The villagers stood in darkness, their eyes glowing faintly with the reflection of spirals. And the children were gone. Only the ropes remained, broken, hanging limp. The innkeeper lifted her head. Her voice was steady, cold. The mist keeps what it takes. I fled to the inn as if walls could protect me. The square still rang with echoes of the ritual. The children's screams lodged like splinters in my skull. I stumbled through the fog, blind and shaking, until the crooked outline of the inn's door loomed ahead. I shoved it open and slammed it shut behind me, pressing my back against the wood as if I could hold out the night itself. Inside, the silence was worse. The common room lay empty. The hearth was cold, the tables bare. The innkeeper's apron still hung on its peg by the door, but she herself was gone. A single lantern flickered weakly above the bar, its light trembling in the draught that seeped through the cracks. I slid the bolt across the door, then another, then dragged a table against it, piling chairs and anything I could lift into a crude barricade. My hands shook so violently that the wood clattered and scraped. Still, I did not stop. If I kept moving, if I built high enough, maybe I could keep it out. But the fog was patient. Already it was seeping through the shutters, curling under the door, drifting in thin tendrils across the floor. I stuffed rags into the cracks, pulled curtains tight, pressed blankets against the seams. Still, the pale fingers slid inside, coiling around chair legs, brushing against my ankles. I climbed the stairs two at a time, desperate for higher ground. The innkeeper's rooms were all empty, beds unmade, drawers half open, as though their owners had left in haste. In one, a child's toy lay on the pillow, a wooden horse, its spiral-carved chest staring at me like an open wound. I shut the door, turned the key, and sank against it. My chest heaved, my skin slick with sweat, though the air was cold. For a while I sat in the darkness, clutching my knees to my chest, whispering to myself that walls were still walls, that door still held, that the fog was only weather. But it was not. It seeped beneath the door, so fine it looked like smoke. I pressed my palm against the crack, but the mist slid over my skin, cool and deliberate, curling into my fingers. I snatched my hand back. The skin tingled where it touched me, the spirals faintly visible beneath the flesh if something inside were tracing them. I lit every candle I could find. The room glowed with their trembling light. But the fog did not retreat. It gathered in the corners, patient, waiting. The flames bent toward it, as though drawn. Exhaustion dragged me down. My eyes burned, my body heavy. I lay on the bed, still in my clothes, staring at the ceiling. The fog pulsed in the corners, dim and steady, like the rhythm of a hidden heart. And then I dreamed, or thought I did. The inn was gone. I stood in the square again, the villagers arrayed around me. Their eyes glowed, their mouths open in silent chant. The children stood at the center, but their faces were blurred, melted into spirals of flesh. The innkeeper reached out her hand, and her fingers were made of fog. She touched my cheek, and I felt it, cold, endless, hollow. "You belong," she whispered. Her voice was not hers. It was the voice of the mist itself. I woke gasping, the sheets damp with sweat. The candles had all gone out. The room was full of fog. It pressed against my face, sank into my lungs. I coughed and choked, clawing at the air, but there was nothing to grasp. The mist wasn't only around me. It was inside me, filling me from the inside out. My vision swam, spots of light bursting behind my eyes. I stumbled to the window, tearing the shutters open. The night stared back, endless grey. No stars, no moon, only fog. It surged inside, engulfing me, and in it, I saw them. The children, their faces pale, their mouths open, not screaming, laughing. Their laughter rang through the fog, high and thin, echoing until it filled every corner of my skull. I slammed the shutters closed, pressed my forehead against the wood, and sobbed. The inn was no refuge. There was no refuge. The fog was not outside. It had never been outside. It was in me. I no longer trusted the walls. Morning, if it was morning at all, brought no light. The shutters might as well have opened onto stone. The sky beyond was the same thick grey as the night before. My throat burned from breathing it. My chest rattled with each breath. The air was thinner, sharper, as though the mist itself had turned to glass and was cutting me from the inside. I stumbled downstairs, clutching the banister. The barricade at the door had fallen, not broken but shifted. The chairs lay neatly stacked, the table pushed aside, the bolt drawn back, as if someone had opened the inn in the night, and then carefully replaced everything, so quiet I had not stirred. Or perhaps it had been me. I couldn't remember. My dreams had bled into waking, smearing together until I could no longer tell when I was asleep. My notebook sat on the bar, its pages fluttering in a draught. I flipped through it with shaking hands. The words were not mine. They were spirals, endless spirals, inked over and over, filling whole pages, looping tighter and tighter until they formed faces, the same hollow-eyed faces I had seen carved in the church wall, etched now in my own handwriting. I dropped the book as if it burned me. The innkeeper's voice drifted from the kitchen. "You've always been here." I froze. I hadn't seen her since the ritual. My pulse pounded as I crept toward the sound. The kitchen door hung ajar. The smell of smoke and herbs curled out, sour and metallic. I pushed the door open. No one. Only the empty hearth, a pot simmering, though no fire burned beneath it. The steam rose thick and white, twisting into shapes that almost resembled words. I staggered back. My reflection in the window above the sink caught my eye. My face, pale, hollow, lips moving, whispering, but I hadn't spoken. I fled outside. The village greeted me with silence. No footsteps, no chatter, no tolling bells. The houses stood like husks, their doors ajar, their windows blind. The square was empty, the well gaped black and open, the ropes that had once circled it now hanging limp. I thought I was alone, until I heard laughter, high, thin, and broken. A woman sat at the base of the church steps, her head tipped back, her mouth wide. She laughed and laughed, but her eyes were wet with blood. Her body shook with it, her hands clawing at the stones. When I touched her shoulder, her body collapsed into fog. I screamed. The sound echoed to long, stretching, bending, becoming something else. 100 voices answered, mine and not mine, all at once. They rose from the wells, the windows, the ground itself. They filled the air until I couldn't breathe. The mist thickened. The village shifted. Houses bent where they shouldn't. Streets curled back on themselves. I ran, but every turn brought me back to the square. I spun in circles, clawing at my hair, begging for it to stop. And then, silence. The villagers stood all around me, every single one. Faces pale, eyes empty, mouths moving in perfect unison. The innkeeper among them, her apron ghostly in the dim light. The children, too, all the shapes of them, their features blurred, spirals etched into their flesh. I clutched my notebook to my chest, not knowing when I had picked it up again. Its pages fluttered open, the spirals glowing faintly, pulsing with the same rhythm of their chant. My lips moved with theirs. I tried to resist. I tried to scream, but the words slid out anyway, pulled from me like thread from a needle. The chant wrapped around my tongue, my throat, my lungs. Belong, belong, belong. The square tilted. The world spun. My knees buckled. My hands hit stone. The fog pressed against my skin, into my mouth, my ears, my eyes. And something inside me broke. I was not watching the ritual anymore. I was in it. My body moved with theirs. My mouth opened in unison. The mist filled me, and I filled it. There was no boundary, no skin, no thought. Only the chant, only the spiral. And for one terrible moment, I understood. The mist did not come from outside. It was not weather, not curse. It was memory. It was the village itself. Everything it had taken, everything it had swallowed, pressed together into grey. And now it wanted me. I don't remember falling, but I woke on the ground. The stones of the square pressed into my cheek, damp with fog. My body aches as if I had been torn apart and stitched together wrong. When I tried to move, my limbs obeyed sluggishly, heavy as though filled with sand. The villagers were gone. The square stood empty, the well yawning dark in the centre. The church loomed above, its doors gaping, but no sound came from within. The silence rang louder than any bell. I pushed myself upright, trembling. My notebook lay open on the ground beside me, its pages fluttering in the damp wind. The spirals had spread, covering every inch. My handwriting was gone, swallowed whole. The ink pulsed faintly, like veins beneath skin. I shut it and clutched it to my chest. It beat against my ribs like a second heart. The village seemed deserted. I walked the streets, calling out, but no one answered. Houses stood hollow, doors ajar, windows black, beds unmade, meals half-eaten, chairs overturned, as though everyone had risen in the same instant and stepped into the mist, leaving only echoes behind. I found the inn empty. The bar still smelled of smoke and herbs, the hearth cold. The toy horse was gone from the bed upstairs. My reflection in the window was faint, blurred, as though the mist had already begun to erase me. I thought of leaving, of walking until the fog thinned, until the trees gave way to open fields, until I found a road that led anywhere but here. But the forest pressed close, a wall of grey. No matter which street I turned down, it always led me back to the square, always to the well. I stood at its edge, peering into the dark. The air that rose from it was colder than the fog, sharp as knives. I thought I heard water, a slow drip, drip, drip. But then the sound shifted, became breathing. Many lungs, many throats, exhaling in unison. My hand tightened on the notebook. The urge to drop it into the blackness was overwhelming. To give it back, to let the mist keep what it had claimed. But I could not. It had become part of me, or I part of it. The fog swirled thicker, rising higher, curling around the stones. Faces formed in it, familiar and not. The innkeeper's hollow eyes, the blurred features of the children. My aunt, smiling with lips that were not hers. They whispered together, the same words over and over, until the syllables no longer sounded like language, but like breath itself. It begins again. It begins again. The ground trembled beneath me. The church bell tolled, a single note that split the fog. My knees buckled, but I clung to the well's edge. I thought of the first night I arrived, of the laughter in the inn, of the warmth of soup on my tongue. It seemed a lifetime ago. Had it been real at all? Or had the mist written it into me? Just another spiral in the notebook's pages. The fog rose higher. My reflection wavered in the black water, distorted, spiraling outward. Not my face, but something stretched and hollow, its mouth open in a soundless scream. I shut my eyes, but the whispers did not stop. They pressed against my skull, filled my lungs, wrapped around my bones. I could not shut them out. I could not remember where they ended and I began. The mist keeps what it takes, and I was already gone. They say the fog has lifted, that the village is quiet now, that the houses stand empty, that no one remembers who lived there. But sometimes, in the night, when the air grows damp and the world is still, a whisper curls at the edge of hearing, A voice not quite yours, not quite mine. It begins again, and if you listen too long, you will not know whether it comes from outside or from within.